Okay, this is part 39 of Rebel. It is actually the 4th of July in America right now. And I've already heard a couple of pops this morning, so if that happens during this, I cannot control it, unfortunately. Make sure, trigger warning, loud noises, be aware. Okay, here we go. Eden. My mind whirls frantically as the guard motions for us to follow him. Han had taken the drone. He must have. For an instant I think we're done. They've caught us, and there's nothing we can do to stop Han from killing us. In front of us, the guard gives an impatient wave of his hand. Han's waiting, he says. Pressa glances once at the door and mouths a single word at me. Go. I don't know where our surge of courage comes from. Desperation, probably. Pressa's hand shoots out and seizes the guard's wrist. Before he even has time to utter a shout of surprise, she yanks him hard inside the room and shoves him against the wall. He gasps, then snarls at Pressa as he moves to grab her throat. I strike him hard in the jaw before he can touch her. If there's anything I've learned from my brother, it's how to throw a punch after getting jumped. My hit lands true. The guard's knees buckle and everything in him goes limp as he slides slowly down to the floor. Pressa gives me an impressed look. Nice one, she says. I shrug. The benefit of a brother who's an AIS agent, I reply. We waste no time stealing out of the room and locking it behind us. Our clock is ticking now. There's no going back. My steps quicken across the metal stairs leading to the upper levels of the building. Here I recognize the cavernous space that houses Han's construction site. Everything is cloaked halfway in shadows, as if silhouettes of guards are standing in every corner. We move slowly, startling at every stairway. Finally, we arrive at the construction site I remember from when I'd first been held captive. The maze-like cavern full of rows of blinking machine lights is as ominous and mesmerizing as ever, the glow casting everything in the space in a dim blue hue. I pull Pressa down beside me before she can reach the top landing of the steps. There, we crouch in the shadows, watching the two guards standing along the metal railing leading down to the main floor. Pressa's gaze sweeps the endless corridors of computers, her mouth slightly open at the sight. Then she glances at me. How do we get down there? She whispers, emphasizing the word soundlessly. I glance at the guards. Their eyes are turned down toward the rest of the floor space. If we can just get past them, we'll be able to lose ourselves in the maze of halls and make our way to the control platform located at the other end of the building. I study the railings of the steps. If Daniel were here, he'd avoid the guards altogether and shimmy down the side of this railing, dropping quietly from floor to floor until he reached the ground below. They'd never know he was here. Before my brother took me on his run through the Lake District, I'd have even laughed at the idea of it, at even attempting to do this. Now, though, I find myself looking at the landing, wondering if there's a way I could at least get us one floor lower and bypass the guards. I may not have Daniel's agility, but maybe I could find a way with my own tricks. I begin shrugging off my jacket. Pressa glances curiously at me. I gesture at her jacket, telling her to do the same, and then point at the railings beside us and then at the ground below. Pressa blinks at me. Are you out of your mind? She whispers. If you want to fight those guards, be my guest, I whisper back. Then I slide over to the metal bars of the railing and leap my jacket through the holes. The bottom of the railing is open just wide enough for me to slide through. It's a tight squeeze, though. Pressa watches me go for a moment before she comes over to join me. I lay flat on my back and push through the bottom of the railing, then lower myself gingerly, the sleeves of my jacket wrapped tightly around my left fist. I dangle over the edge, a silhouette lost in the shadows. Up above, the guards don't move. I let myself swing a little back and forth, then I let go. I catch myself against the lower floor's railings and manage to land in a soft crouch. There, I stay for a second, breathless, listening for the guards above to notice and mutter to each other. Nothing. Pressa comes shortly after me. She hangs in midair for a beat too before doing the same and crouching beside me. Her landing is quieter than mine, but one of her bootlaces clinks against the metal railing. The sound makes a tiny echo. We freeze. For a second, we don't hear anything. Then one of the guards shifts above us. That came from downstairs, she says. Are you sure? The second one answers. It just sounded like the building shifting. Probably. The first guard starts to move. I'll take a quick look in case. We have to move. Now. I grab Pressa's hand and we start running as quickly as we can down the walkway toward the next flight of steps. Up above, the guard's footsteps clank loudly on the stairs. If she reaches us before we can get to the lower floor, she'll see us and sound the alarm. We race on quiet feet down the flight of stairs. We make it to the ground floor just as the guard above us starts walking across the second floor walkway. I look around. The maze of halls now stretches out all around in every direction. "This way," I whisper, then choose one of the halls that seems to head toward where the control platform will be. Pressa darts silently behind me. Behind us, the guard reaches the bottom floor too. She stops there for a moment and then continues, searching for the source of the sound. My palms are drenched in sweat. All I want in this moment is for Daniel to be here, but I push the thought away immediately. Focus on the task at hand. That's all I can do. We make our way down the hall. Somewhere behind us, the guard begins to turn into our hall. We reach the end of the corridor. Pressa yanks me along as she turns us sharply right down another corridor. There, we crouch, sucking in lungfuls of air. The guard walks halfway down the hall we just came from. I get ready for us to sprint again, but then the guard halts silently for a moment. We wait, two tense, frozen figures. Finally, the guard sighs and begins walking the way she came. Her footsteps grow more distant until I hear the familiar clang of her walking back up the stairs to join her partner again. Pressa lets out a shaky breath. I glance to our side, then pull us to our feet. "We're not far now," I whisper. We race down the halls. There's no time. Han is probably delirious with fever right now. It's our only chance. The hall stretches so long, the computers on either side so endless with their blinking lights, that I start to think I'd taken us the wrong way, when finally, up ahead, I see the corridors abruptly open up. There, ahead of us, is a circular control platform. I skate to a halt before it. Then I reach down with trembling fingers and pull the chip from the side of my ankle. Beside me, Pressa gapes at the space. I power the system on. The virtual circle expands out in an arc around us, followed shortly by the burst of glowing white nodes. I kneel in the circle, trying to remember how Han had shown me to access the main system. Almost there. Pressa stands guard nearby, looking out at the corridors in anticipation of guards. Finally, I find it. The system initiates, showing me Han's profile. I'm so relieved that I almost let out a shout. The chip holding the signal I created is in the palm of my hand. I touch it once, and the data on it suddenly appears to hover over my hand. Now all I have to do is download it into the system. But I don't get to, because the instant the system comes on, I hear a familiar voice behind me. It's Pressa, but her words are tight with fear. "Eden," she says. I know he's here without even turning around. The hairs rise on the back of my neck. I look over my shoulder to see Han standing there, his eyes fixed on me. He doesn't look sick at all. There's a faint smile on his face. "I was wondering when you'd make your move," he says, his eyes flicker calmly to Pressa. "And the little doctor. You're looking very awake, miss." Pressa freezes beside me. She doesn't say anything back to him. Han's referring to the fact that she hasn't reacted as she should have to the concoction she'd fed him. I shift slightly toward her as if to protect her. At her expression, Han just smiles coolly and turns his attention to me. My heart lodges in my throat. I glance long enough at his face to gauge how he must be feeling right now. His face is pale and there's a faint sheen of sweat on his brow, but otherwise he seems to be alert. He must have figured out Pressa's serum in time to give himself an antidote of some sort, or he hadn't drunk enough of it. Behind him there are at least a half-dozen guards, their weapons drawn and pointed in our direction. Han snaps his fingers once. The virtual system that had hovered around me now shifts to encircle him. "This was once part of the grid that Ross City used to store the level system's data," Han tells me. "Now it's part of my system." I wait for him to mention the drone he must have taken off me. He doesn't. Everything he's doing seems natural right now, as if he knows nothing about my and Pressa's plans at all. It makes me shiver. "You always wanted something greater than just disabling the level system," I say. "You wanted to control it for yourself." "Exactly," he tells me. He waves a hand once before me, and when he does, I suddenly am able to shift the floating nodes around. "And once you start behaving yourself as part of my crew, you'll have access to all this as you help to rebuild it for its new purpose." Once you start behaving yourself. Now when I look at Han, I can see the dangerous glint in his eyes. Gone is the grieving father I once saw, the man who had lost his wife and son. This is the killer, the criminal. "I found your clever little drone," Han says softly to me. "Or were you going to tell me at some point?" I step slowly around the circle, my attention still partly fixated on the nodes. Every single one is a marker of how you level up, at least in Han's new world. "What's the point of doing this?" I say suddenly. "Corrupting it all, destroying the level system, and then replacing it with your own. What about everything you said against the city, that you didn't believe in people being treated like this? Now you're just going to do the same thing?" Han smiles. "Sometimes it isn't the idea that's corrupt, but the one operating it." he replies. Would you want the entire level system deleted? You've seen what kind of chaos can reign in the streets without it. It's almost as if he knows about the chip I plan to install into the level system too. I hate him for the gray zone that he keeps challenging me to think in. Think about how many people in the city must be terrified right now, without the level system in place, he continues. The Undercity civilians have suffered, been suppressed, and been beaten back into line by the city. Now imagine that I replace the city's government. I return the level system to its place, only now it runs how I desire. The Skyfloor citizens lose their power. I hand it to the Undercity's population. People hate chaos, you know. If you hand them back control over their lives, they will fall to their knees before you and shower you with gratitude. I scowl at him. So you want people to look up to you instead as their savior after they've suffered through the chaos that you inflicted in the first place? Han nods. For a second, the fatherly side of him returns and his gaze softens. My son, Eric, was as sharp as you are, he says, shaking his head. I wish you could have met him. He was such an intelligent boy, so full of potential. He was as promising as you. Even though I'm standing here as his captive and enemy, I can tell that when he looks at me, there's someone else he imagines in my place. Then the moment's gone and his eyes harden again. You think I let you back in here without suspecting anything, he says, that you suddenly had a change of heart, that you really chose to turn your back on your brother. He shakes his head, looking almost sad. You really think I believed that you wanted to cure my condition? Pressa scowls at him. That medication was real, she interrupts. Oh, I know. He raises an eyebrow at her. And I appreciate your administration of it. You'll have to forgive me for emptying the contents of my stomach afterward, though. I've heard those herbs will cause terrible fevers. Or were you already aware of that? Pressa's jaw tightens. She opens her mouth to say something back at him, but before she can, Dominic Hahn has a gun in his hand, the shiny barrel pointed in her direction. I move toward Pressa, but he's too fast. He fires straight at her.